Welcome to Living Web Farms. If you haven't been here before, we are an education and research-based nonprofit organization that focuses on education toward resiliency and sustainable living. And so we offer classes throughout the year on cooking, yes, but also farming, homesteading, gardening, alternative energy, livestock production, and really topics across the spectrum. So be sure to check out the schedule at the website, and you'll be able to check out what's going to be happening next year and sign up in advance if that's something that you want to do. My name's Meredith, and I work primarily with the livestock here at the farm and also doing a little bit of soil research, and I oversee the education program with a lot of help from the rest of the staff. And yeah, one of my wheelhouses is cooking classes, so that's why I'm here talking about fire cooking tonight. And this is Pat.
Hi, I'm the director here at Living Web Farms, and I wear all different hats, but cooking is a passion of mine. The very first long session class we had, we cooked a meal for people. We never stopped. We like the idea that you not only come and spend time on the farm, but you experience the food on the farm. But can't really do one of those for this hour and a half, but we can focus on the food, the cooking. Yeah, usually people get to taste a fair amount. You know?
We're excited about this class. It's one of 4 classes we're doing in a series. We're really interested in providing like really axiological, like fundamental knowledge about what transforms food from its raw form to what we enjoy on the plate. So we did a class about salt. If you're interested, it's on the YouTube channel. This is the next class we're looking at fire because it's the oldest form of applying heat to food. But we're also going to talk about principles of just transforming food with any kind of heat tonight. So you can hopefully apply what you learned to cooking on your oven or your gas grill or any other type of cooking that you want to do with heat. And then next year we're going to be doing a class on fat and a class on acid. So those will be the essentials series if you want to be looking ahead and getting all those under your belt. So yeah, when I sat down to sort of think about this class, I was thinking about how it would be nice to just talk about all the different things that heat does to our food that we may overlook because we've either been cooking for a really long time or you have no experience at all and you have zero idea. But either way, we can sort of start from the same spot. But basically heat is the primary contributor to texture, I would say, like our perceived texture. And it's the way we can manipulate texture super well. So if we want something to be flaky and dry, or if we want something to be moist and crispy, then we have to sort of think backward and figure out what temperature and what type of heat we want to apply. And also, like, I think heat is like this really sort of old primal way of us understanding that something is edible and nutritious for us. You know, like it's like a sensory cue that it's delicious, right, or nutritious, or able for our bodies to digest.
It gets the gastric juices going as you smell it cooking.
That's right. And so that feeds into the next thing where, like, through browning reactions, which we'll explore a little bit more deeply, then heat unlocks like all these millions of different flavor molecules and aroma molecules in these crazy recursive, like nonstop chemical reactions that are going on the surface as well as inside the food. And based on basically the temperature, the moisture, the pH, all these other factors, fat content, what ingredients you've used, you don't have a lot of control at some point because there are so many factors. But with a little bit of basic knowledge, you can really drive and anchor what you're trying to do. So that's the goal. And also color. Color is a big thing that heat imparts. We're going to approach several different methods of cooking. I think trying to explore different temperature ranges. I think that's sort of how we're ending up approaching this. And really the way I'd like folks to think about it is just think about what you want to accomplish. And once you know what you want to accomplish, then you can decide sort of what elements you want to include in you're composing the heat that you're going to use. So you want to think about temperature, you want to think about moisture, and you want to think about time. And those are the main things that are going to really affect both the food itself as well as the heat source that you're using. And so I want to give you some temperature markers to start with, and just in case you want them for your notes. When we're from about 80 degrees to 180 degrees, we're looking at like dehydrating foods or smoking foods. We have a smoker downstairs that we'll go look at some point during the class. We're not going to light it just because I don't really think we have the time to get it lit, let those coals really develop, and then cool the smoke enough to not just make it a pain in my neck to clean up later. I mean, I would be sitting here all night probably trying to get it right. But I did bring a piece of pork belly that I smoked for 30 hours with cold smoke, so you guys can just sort of see the, the color and the different texture that it imparted. And then, okay, so 180 to like 212, that's when we're talking about like steaming in the presence of a lot of moisture, obviously. And 212 degrees Fahrenheit is boiling temperature. So if you see water boiling, you know it's at least 212 degrees. And then when we go like 230 degrees to 300 degrees, that's when browning reactions start occurring. And so when we're talking about browning reactions, we're talking about a reaction called the Maillard reaction, which is a French word named after a French dude who discovered a lot of the really initial chemical reactions involved there. And what happens with the Maillard reaction is when simple sugars, reducing sugars, and proteins start interacting in the presence of heat. And it can actually, I was reading about it yesterday and found out that Maillard reactions can occur at room temperature, provided there's enough time. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really require heat, but that's usually how we make it happen when we're cooking.
And oftentimes things will mold before the Maillard reaction.
There you go. Yeah.
So I think kind of gets you there without losing it.
So I think that if there's enough moisture but not too much, then maybe you can get there. So then 350 to 375 is like the nice frying and fat temperature. So if you're looking to get oil or fat to the right temp for frying, that's your goal. And then baking and roasting obviously is like dry cooking. Those are your temp ranges for that. And then 375 or higher is going to be your broiling and grilling temperatures. And we're talking about much, much higher when we're talking about fire cooking. Does everybody know how to start a fire? Okay, great. So we don't really need to go over that. We did bring a few things. Like these are some cedar shavings. And this is great for making like what we call a nest if you're just starting a fire and you want to get like something that's really quick burning that will ignite fast. And then you want to add like super dry, bigger chunks that will start to develop coals. And then you can start really messing with what kinds of wood and what kinds of fuel you want to put on there. And we can talk about that in more depth when we go into like smoking, because I think that's sort of the area of fire cooking where you can really start tweaking aroma and flavor and color based on the type of fuel that you're using and the relative moisture within that fuel. But as far as like creating a fire like this, I think you mostly just need pretty cured hardwood. Yeah. So what did you use?
Mostly oak.
Okay.
Might be a little bit of gum or sourwood in there. I couldn't quite tell, but it definitely wasn't oak. And a lot of what's on top, the bulk of what we're going to be cooking on, we basically made a bed of oak coals and then a bunch of char that came from the last time we fired the wood stove. We always end up with a bunch of char from that. But it's pretty exclusively oak, I'd say. Yeah. Oak, a little bit of locust, but mostly oak. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I had some cherry, but we never ended up putting that on there. But that's a pretty good one too, if you have it around. So I guess there's a few techniques we're going to explore. Did you want to cook some peppers on gas?
But I guess what I wanted to do first was give people a description of what's going on here, and then spread the coals so it can start to temper.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Go for it.
All right. So to get a wood-fired oven ready to cook in, and we've got a bunch of videos showing this. You start a fire hours earlier. You don't make a big fire, you make a small hot fire where you want it to cover the entire expanse of the oven, but pretty small footprint, maybe about that big of a section going across it. And then you let it burn down, and when the coals are pretty well burned down, you add a couple pieces of wood. Pretty small wood, that size is pretty ideal. I used some bigger stuff because the Monster Mall was being hard and I was tired of it. But mostly I got about this size. And so you just put like 2 or 3 pieces on at a time. You want it to burn hot and fast. You want completely dry wood. You don't want wet wood at all. Every time you go to add wood, you push the fire back about an inch. And you slowly move it back across the oven so you heat the entire floor. And of course it's not only heating the floor, but it's rising up and then licking out across the top. So you're saturating heat into the base and the top. And this is all about heating mass. And the better you heat the mass, the better you'll cook or bake, and the longer you'll be able to bake. We've had varying degrees of success.
But you need time to get the coals where you want them to be. And if you want, say you want a lower temperature, if you want a smoldering temperature, this is like a fire that's at about 400 degrees, which is pretty low for a fire. then in that case, you might want to be burning some fresher wood. But to get to the point where that's going to actually catch and smolder, you have to have a really decent bed of coals going beforehand. And if you don't give the time for that to happen, you'll just snuff it out.
And this takes attention.
It takes attention and slow
And
work.
awareness. I mean, countless times I've had other people try and help me, and they make this huge fire, and it kind of kills the oven because there's not enough oxygen in there, and then you got to snake all these hot coals out, find a place to put them, and start over. It can't be a big fire; it's got to be a small fire. Okay, so this one here, it's back about as far as it'll go, and I'll probably let it stay back there for a moment, show you the pepper, and then I'll come out and I'll just spread the coals all over the oven and close the door, and that'll kill the fire, and we'll let those coals like even it out. Right now it's got hot spots and cool spots, and we'll just let those coals sit in there, and then we'll give it we'll do the other processes, and then we'll push the rest of the coals back, put those bricks in front of it so it isn't too hot, and then bake some bread in there. And then we could bake bread for a long time probably, but tonight we're just going to do some focaccia. You can have nothing but a gas stove and still be cooking with fire.
Right.
And get a really nice kind of exotic flavor, and have nothing but a gas stove.
Like the home oven is like a really finicky little thing that we deal with all the time. So I think I read recently that if you preheat an oven to 350 degrees, it'll actually go to 375 or so before the element actually clicks off. And then it will start to fall really to the temperature range. And depending on the use and the age of your oven, it might not be calibrated. And then, of course, when you open the door to check things or put things in, you're letting the cold air in. So the temperature is not very consistent. Whereas when you're cooking with fire, of course, there are different inconsistencies there too. But I think you can really get a more consistent temperature going, provided you've taken the time, like we said, to prepare the coals. One of the things, just the principles that I wanted to share is that since we were talking about browning, is the importance of moisture in that process. So one of the things that about heat and cooking with fire that is so fun is that once people start learning how to do it, they stop having to really use thermometers or wonder whether their food is done because they're using sensory cues to figure that out. So you're smelling it, you're looking at the texture, and so the same thing applies. Like if you're trying to reach a certain end with the cooking that you're after, then understanding how moisture plays with heat is really important for that. So an example is like we harvested all these shiitakes Friday, I think, and they were super waterlogged because of all the rain. And so they have a lot of moisture in them right now. So they're gonna benefit from like some initial really hot heat before I even season them or before I do anything. And even if the heat wasn't high enough, they would just start steaming, right? And so if you're cooking food at too low of a temperature, but what you want it to do is brown, and you want the Maillard reaction to proceed, you'll start to see little beads of sweat on your food. And what that means is that you're at like temperatures around what? Boiling temperature, 212. So you need higher temperatures and you need drier heat in order to get the effect that you want. Does that make sense? If you want something to be not crispy, not dry on the surface, then you'll either consider wrapping it up like we're gonna do with some of this ash cooking stuff that we're gonna do later, or you wanna get that heat down so that you're closer to that 212 sort of boiling temperature. So Pat's gonna show you some pepper goodness.
And I could do it out here easily, but I wanna show you on the gas stove inside, because that is what we can use anytime. Come on inside, let's just char some pepper. All peppers benefit from this. For a long time, I loved how productive Anaheims were, but I complained about their skin. And then I finally realized they were bred to be charred. They were bred to have a good, thick skin that you could char and easily pull off. And so what I was complaining about was somebody worked to get. And I don't dare eat an Anaheim now that I don't char. Anytime I'm looking to add something special to a pasta or a salad or any number of dishes where I just want a little special oomph, just charring the peppers and peeling that skin off totally makes it special. If you have a huge harvest, you could go ahead and char a whole mess of peppers and store them in oil. The one thing you got to remember is keep them refrigerated. You do not want to take that out, let it sit on the counter overnight, and then go to eat it, because there's a chance, not a huge chance probably, but enough of a chance of botulism. So oil excludes oxygen, that's how botulism thrives. The odds are good you probably killed the organisms with the charring, but you can't count on it. I'd say just keep it in the fridge and be safe. But it's a great way to store. Once you char them, you can pack a lot of peppers. You know, it looks like a lot of peppers, but when they've been charred and cut up, you can pack a lot in a jar, and it's just a huge resource to have. I don't know if it really matters. Someplace I learned to throw them in a plastic bag and throw them in the freezer for a while before I peeled them. So I tend to char them early and do that, but when I don't have time, I just char them. Go ahead and clean them. I clean them under water, running water. I find that the easiest way to do it. I find I got to move them around. That's the nice thing. If we did it outside, we'd have an even heat and one whole side would char. Here it's only charring where the flame is going around, but you're much more likely to be dealing with it on this level than, you know, having a grill at least lots of times. If you want to do it often, this is a more reliable way. It's not charred enough to come off, and that just adds a little bit of char flavor, and it doesn't matter. You know, just you can do it as much as you want and still have a nice effect.
So what temperature do you think that is, Pat?
Yeah, as little as 490 right on the pepper, even though the flame's right on it. And that crackling, that's the skin, you know, charring up.
So one thing you might not know is that cellulose doesn't break down from heat. It breaks down from moisture. So if you have something super duper fibrous, then applying heat, this is why if you put a corn in the fire with its husk still on, the husk doesn't necessarily burn, right? It doesn't go away. It just sort of forms this shell around it. And that's another reason why corn husks are used for wrapping things in for fire cooking, if you wanted to wrap something besides the corn cob itself. So if you wanted to break down something very fibrous and make it really tender, you would have to include some extra moisture into the cooking process.
That's probably enough. All I'm doing is I run the water. You might have a sieve so that the stuff doesn't clog your sink up. And just kind of scratching it off under the running water. It's real easy to get it clean and fast, you know, quickly get it clean. And you can tell where it's been roasted enough to come off very quickly. Like I just hit the limits of what's going to come off, probably except for maybe right down there.
Some people are concerned about the effects of fire on food, and particularly like from really, really hot fires, we encounter creosote, we encounter polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which have been linked to cancer. So if you are worried about that, low, slow heats for you, and you know any extra char that's on the food, you would want to knock it off because you'll still have, you know, the flavor inside. But
You have to say that again 3 times in a row fast.
Why? Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons? Yeah. I don't think I can. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe this is a good time to talk about fuel, since we're touching on this. The things in wood that break down and create flavor and aroma and cause the cooking process are the components of the wood itself, which are hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin. And different woods have different compositions, right? So they combust differently and they release hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin at different rates. For example, softwoods are higher in lignin, and so lignin produces hotter fires. So this is why you'll hear that of people saying, I never use conifer species when I'm trying to smoke foods because I'm looking for lower temperatures. So you'll get greater buildup of creosote. The hotter your fire is, you'll get more polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The hotter your fire is. So if you want to avoid those things, you know, you want to moderate the fuel that you're using. So, you know, I deal with this in a lot because I smoke a lot of meats. And so I have woods that I'll use for more smoldering fires, more middle smoking fires, and then really hot fires, which I don't really mess with too much. But, you know, oak and hickory and mesquite and stuff are going to produce like, you know, bigger, hotter fires. And then I use like apple and maybe sometimes pecan for those medium sort of fires. And then like really low smoking woods are like alder or beech or birch, like hardwoods that are really light. Having a little bit of knowledge about that, and there are endless lists online of these, you know, categorizing these woods. And if you wanted to geek out about it, there's a book actually called On the Destruction and Distillation of Wood, and it's all about the different ways that different wood species combust and pyrolyze, which is pretty fascinating. And I think it's out of print, therefore pretty expensive now. But Dan told me about it, and it's super fascinating. Anyways, once you have sort of that in your arsenal, you can choose your fuel to affect the heat of your fire and therefore affect the amount of char on your food and the ultimate temperature, which is, of course, like we said, affecting the ultimate texture, affecting the way that browning reactions occur. That's important. I think also the moisture, like we said, the moisture of the food itself is important, but also the moisture in the wood is important. So if you have wood that isn't cured all the way, then it's not going to burn as quickly or as hot.
It's not going to burn as clean either.
Or as clean, right.
Lack of cleanliness is going to affect your flavor.
But I guess that also depends on how direct the fire is, too. Because if you have a fire that's indirect, which we'll see when we look at the smoker, a lot of that stuff will slough off before the smoke actually gets to the food. So it's less of a concern.
So all I'm doing now is, basically it's a bed of coals in there. I'm going to spread them around and let them settle down and get a more even heat to the whole thing. The little bit of flame that's left is going to go out because I'm going to deprive it of oxygen.
Right, great point. Fire's alive. The more air you give it, the bigger flame is. The amount of draft you have is going to be the ultimate effector on the smoke that you produce if you're using smoke to flavor or preserve. This would be a great situation for spit cooking. So that's one of my favorite things to do, especially for cooking animals if you're inclined. You can make a spit very, very easily. But what I would do is just choose a relatively green, branch of some kind of sapling, and you can strip it. You take all the bark off if you want. Bark can really smoke a lot, has a lot of lignin in it, so you can take that off. And then a lot of times people will, you would want it to be a little bit thicker than this probably, but a lot of times people will poke into it and then put two smaller fleshed sticks in between. And then you can sort of fit whatever you're spit roasting around it. So you would stick, say I had a pumpkin, I would stick one side of the pumpkin on that side of the peg and the other side of the pumpkin on this side of the peg. And then you basically just need to secure it over the fire. So if you're doing this on the ground, it's super easy to do all of this with just wood that you find around. So you can get a stronger piece of sapling than this, get all the bark off. I don't know that you really need to notch it in order to put the pegs through. I think you may be able to just balance them using the food, wrapping the food around it, but you'll just have to assess based on, the materials that you have. And then you could get two crotched branches somewhere, drive them into the ground to hold the spit up on either side. And then all you want is for the food to just be about 18 inches above the coals. You don't want flames like licking up on the food unless you're looking for that black charring effect. But probably what would happen then is that the food is going to cook too much on the outside and not enough on the inside. So you do kind of want a bed of coals like this. And what we did for this is we fed it with a lot of oak. We let it rage for a while. Then we broke them down once they had burned enough. And then we even drizzled a little bit of water over it just to snuff out the active flames and get it just smoldering. And I find if I'm spit cooking, I have to really look at the shape of the food to figure out where I want my coals to be. So a lot of times I'll set up my spit, but I'll put my fire back here so that I can push the coals under the food in the way that I want them arranged. For example, if I was cooking a lamb or something, it's got more meat in the shoulder and in the hip than it does in the middle, and I don't want to burn the middle. So my fire almost ends up looking like an hourglass underneath it, just to keep it cooking evenly. And a lot of people think, I can't spit cook because I don't have something fancy that rotates. And you really don't need it to be constantly rotating unless you want to experience what old school, kitchen cooks were doing, is standing there and just turning this thing. But you can really just watch it and, pick it up and turn the spit and just let it cook for a while, just like Pat did with the pepper, picking it up and turning it to get even cooking all the way around. This is a cool thing you can do if you don't have something, like say you're camping and you want to broil. You just take saplings like that, you get a little bit of cordage and you just kind of lance together. I'm going to lose that mushroom. You sort of lance together. I took one, as you can see, and I just bent it. And then I was like putting other ones this way and that way to make a little bit of a rack. And what I'm going to do is, like I said, we have like a 700-800 degree bed of coals here. What I'm doing right now is just trying to dry them out a little bit. Another thing you could do is salt them. Like I could have salted them a little bit earlier to let salt draw a little bit of water out of the cells tissue. But sometimes what you'll find if you do that is as soon as you put it on the heat, all the moisture gets sucked back in. So I thought it might be better to give it a little dry heat before seasoning it. And the only thing I prepared for these mushrooms is just some garlic that I macerated in some sherry vinegar, and then I dumped butter over it. And I thought I would just brush it on. You can probably guess how this is gonna go. We're just gonna flip it over and flip it over again until we're satisfied.
If you don't want to deal with that much moisture in mushrooms, right before you cook them, you can literally wring them out. I'd save the water. You won't do it any other time because they'll bruise and be a mess, but you're going to cook them right away, so it doesn't matter.
Are there any trees that would be poisonous, or sticks or things like rhododendron?
Rhododendron, I think mountain laurel too, aren't they both?
Yeah. Any tree that you would put in a wood fire,
Birch.
just find new growth on it. You can use that as well.
Pussy willows in February and great grilling sticks in July.
So we'll definitely get very fast browning reactions here because we have a very hot fire. Like we said, the lowest temperature we need for browning reactions to occur is about 230. But that's also, it takes a little bit more time to get it at such low temperatures. I smoked this bacon for 30 hours at less than 80 degrees. So it was at very low temperatures, but you can see it got beautiful browning on it. And it's not actually done. When you're smoking at temperatures that are that low, you're looking to actually dehydrate food over time because you're not going to ever cook it. So this probably should have kept going for days and days until it had really weight loss would be the marker for its preservation. So if it had lost 30 to 50% of its original weight when I stuck it in, then I would know it was shelf stable. But since bacon we like to take off and just throw in a hot frying pan, I didn't really care. I was like, I feel like it's smoky enough. I love the color. So it's time to take it off. You'll notice I left the skin on. That was just to keep the moisture in it, and it's very, very easy to peel it off. The other thing I'm gonna broil, because we can, is this eggplant. And what I'm doing is just feeling for just the different parts of the fire to figure out which parts are hotter and which parts are not as hot. Really what I had to do for that is put that griddle on top of it and set it on there. If I put that right on the fire, it would be far too hot for that eggplant and it would just char. So anyways, there's salt and pepper in here, but another thing you could do is just salt it separately from the whatever rub you're putting on it.
By the way, this grill is an old hot water heater. I can't really build much of anything, but I can cook for people who do. So I had a blacksmith friend who owed me some favors, and I said, I got a hot water heater, I need a grill.
So these, again, mushrooms don't take much. So when they start to sort of release their own juices, I feel like it's time to eat them, But if you wanted them to be a little bit browner, that's fine. A lot of people, when they make caramel, they like to be a little bit darker than what's considered ready, and that's just fine. This is eggplant that I took rosemary, thyme, and parsley, and I blended them with olive oil and some more of that garlic that I had macerated in sherry vinegar, plus salt and pepper, and just rubbed it over them. So we're gonna eat those, and we're gonna eat these in just a second. We should mention, since we're talking about high heat cooking on the coal bed, we can talk about plank cooking and hot stone cooking. So if you are interested in, if you have like a split of wood, we don't have a good example up here, but picture one of those just with two flat sides. Really what I would do at that point is just take my pocket knife and just gouge some pretty deep holes into the plank, and then I would whittle down some pegs. It's pretty thick that would fit into those holes that I gouged into it. Then I can get the food as flat as possible. If that takes butterflying it, slicing it, whatever, set it on top and then use the pegs to secure it. I was gonna use that for the mushrooms, but I figured they would just fall apart. So that's why I chose to sandwich them in between the branches. That's a great way to cook something. If it's secured well enough and you don't think the heat's gonna cause it to fall apart and fall off the pegs, is you can actually turn it sideways and just let the heat radiate onto it. And you can still get browning reactions that way. Instead of putting it right over the fire. You can also produce the same effect with a hot rock, like a hot flat rock that you put in the fire, get it really hot, and then put the food on top of it and cook it that way. You can get browning reactions that way as well. Oh, that looks good, doesn't it? It's got that perfect balance of moisture and browning on the outside.
All the items are from the farm?
Yes, all the items are from the farm, aren't they?
Can't think of anything that isn't.
That pork is not, but it's from nearby, so you can feel good about it. The other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was just cooking right in the coals. And this is something that most people are familiar with doing in tinfoil, but I don't really love tinfoil. So I like to talk about cooking in the coals either in clay or in a Dutch oven. So clay is good for baking and roasting. Dutch oven is good for some of the same things. Really deep dishes like that, it's harder for steam to escape. So you're going to be retaining more moisture in the vessel, right? And really ash cooking is best for situations where you don't want quick searing reactions. You want slower, more moisture heavy reactions. So what I've done here is I didn't put any seasoning on this particular one, so I might want to unwrap it. But I wanted to have one ready to show you. I was going to use kudzu leaves. Kudzu leaves are great for this, but these are fig leaves from the fig tree right down there. And then I tied them up with corn husks, the really green corn husks. So this is just a slice of butternut squash that I have wrapped in the fig leaf and put the corn husk around. And I can just put this right into the coals or on top of the griddle. And this is a great way to cook fish over the fire, is to wrap it in leaves, because you're essentially just like, if you've ever cooked fish in a packet in the oven, which is a pretty famous way of cooking fish in parchment paper or foil, it's kind of the same situation, except it's a really primitive way of cooking things on the fire, especially fish. And it's really great. And the cool thing about this is you can mix, if you're going camping or anything, you can just mix things up ahead of time. And I did the fig leaves like this to give it just more surface. And so I always have so many random things just sitting in my fridge that I made for a specific purpose. And then I'm like, oh, now I have extra. So this is like a sweet balsamic sauce that I made with balsamic and olive oil and a little bit of extra sweetener, honey, some garlic, a tad bit of mustard, and salt and pepper. And this is a sage salt that I made from just blending sea salt with fresh sage leaves. So then I'm just going to take, and this is quite salty, so I don't want to overdo it.
I'm sure you're not the first person to wrap things in fig leaves.
Oh no. Yeah, the more surface the leaf has, the less work you have to do, And I was on a bike ride yesterday, and I was like looking at all the kudzu, and I was like, I should stuff some of these in my shirt so that I have them for the class. The other thing is to think about the flavor that the leaf might impart.
That you didn't soak them or anything like that. These are just.
I didn't soak them. You could soak them. These are just fresh. Okay. And they may be less likely to hold up in the fire if they are looking like this, and I try to wrap it. But
We can soak that one.
yeah, we could soak that one. I don't have any water right here.
I'll give it a soak.
Awesome, thanks.
Understand
Will you soak
everything.
this one that goes with it, and that way we can see the difference? The other thing that putting stuff on the surface of the food affects its pH. So that's another thing to think about. Browning reactions mostly occur at alkaline temperatures or neutral temperatures. So if you put a lot of acid on the surface of your food, then browning reactions are going to occur more slowly. Then again, acid makes things taste great. It really brings out flavor. It also tenderizes stuff, but it's just something to think about. The other thing you can do if you want to say you want to quickly brown some onions, you can put baking soda on them to reduce the pH on the surface, and the browning reaction will occur more quickly. So just little tricks to know based on what's happening scientifically inside the food.
Baking soda makes it faster. Will be one of the ones that.
Well, something really high acid. So if you were to bathe something in vinegar and then try to, unless your temperature was just super high, again, the higher the temperature, the faster the Maillard reaction happens. And once it happens, it's not a single thing. It's like something that scientists don't even really understand fully. That's how cool it is. It's like proteins and sugars start switching and reacting, and then they start these other reactions, and then other reactions and other reactions, and everything just sort of takes off, and it's like this engine of flavor and aroma. And depending on the components of the food itself, for example, I think it's true that foods that are higher in protein than sugar will produce more flavor than aroma, and foods that have a higher balance of sugar to protein, the Maillard reaction will create more aroma than flavor. And so I think the answer to your question depends kind of on what you're cooking. But so if you had a relatively low amount of heat, but you like acid basted something right before you put it on, you might slow the Maillard reaction considerably. If the surface of the product was really dry, you would probably have a hard time getting the browning that you wanted, just because there wouldn't be, there'd be zero water, at the start. And so that would only be if you had like salted something too much before you started. The other thing that is, I guess the more applicable thing is, a lot of people don't let their food rest before they put it on heat. So if you take a cold chicken out of the fridge and you put it even in the oven or over a fire, like the time that it takes it to just like make up that 25-degree differential between room temperature and fridge temperature, it's already going to dry out too much on the skin. So that's going to affect your ability to cook it right and have it browned correctly by the time it's done. And you'll have a dry, flaky, stringy outside, particularly on the breast meat. And that's when we're talking about chicken, but it applies to almost anything. So, even if you change the degrees of your fire or your oven 25 degrees, it wouldn't matter as much as that matters. So take your food out, get it to room temperature, then put it over the flame. And then again, there's also what we call carryover. So things will continue cooking even after you take them off the flame. So when you're worried about something overcooking, please eat the shiitakes, y'all. I don't know what I did with that smaller cutting board.
I made it a point to taste them because to me they didn't look done enough, and surprisingly they're quite done enough.
Ha!
I hate gushy, but these are juicy but not gushy.
I have a thing about mushrooms. I just don't like to insult them. I don't like to crowd them, and I definitely don't like to overcook them. Shiitakes that aren't super fresh, I just don't care for. But that's me. I mean, I think they just taste way too funky, and they overpower everything in the dish.
You know exactly where you're going, so I'm going to look part of it.
Here, let me hold the white pick it up. Make it easy.
I guess I'd rather take it since it's a little cooler. And I don't know if we'll get to taste these, but we're gonna do our best. We can go, what's our next step? Are we doing the oven next, or are we looking at the smoker next?
I'll probably, we also want to talk about the Dutch oven cooking. I'm going to get to cure this Dutch oven, which has been sitting in my garage rusting once again. So I'll get to coat it in oil and stick it in the oven when it's about 500 degrees and leave it in there overnight, and it'll be wonderfully cured. It'll have a perfect finish. Last time we used this, we did the foraging workshop at the North River Farm, and we made cobbler. 2 batches of cobbler, blueberry cobbler. We just had a mess of coals. We could do this here, but it'd never be ready in time for you to see it. A mess of coals, we stuck it in the coals and piled coals on top. Just really that high heat, caramelizing things wonderfully. This actually works really well for roasting vegetables. The theory is that you have to take the lid off or it'll steam, but if you're putting it in a bed of coals and covering it with coals, you've just made an oven. It's no longer a pot, it is a Dutch oven. It's not pressure sealed, so it's coming out, there's so much pressure from it, from that much heat, that it's just coming out, It works really wonderfully, I mean, it might start steaming, but it doesn't get to steam very long.
The other thing I'll talk about before we go on to oven and smoker is making a steam pit. It's like the cooking a pig in Hawaii thing that you've heard about, where they dig a hole and they fill it with hot stones, and then they cover that with earth, and then they put the food in, and then there's like more hot stones and earth and banana leaves on top, and then they just let it go. And that's basically a really huge and advanced form of steam cooking. It's the same as wrapping this stuff in the fig leaves. But it's awesome for really slow cooking of large things. It's also like a really, really old traditional method of cooking, like in Patagonia, like lots of vegetables. So you could produce it by building a fire directly in the steam pit. And then as the fire dies and the coals are produced, you can spread them out and then put the earth on top of them. But my favorite way to do it is to build the fire in a separate place and then take bricks or stones that I've found from somewhere else, put them in the fire, heat them up, and then put them in the steam pit so that there's no ash in there. Like I like to just have like the hot rocks. How are they? Good? Okay.
Would you have to replace the rocks in that steam pit?
Sometimes. I guess it depends on what you're cooking, and how hot you got them and how many you had and how well insulated it is. So that's the purpose of putting the earth in there as well. So putting in the rocks, putting a layer of tilty dirt above it, then putting, sometimes people will put like a burlap or cloth over that so that you don't get dirt all over your food. And then you can put, your food on top of that, and then you'd want another layer of said burlap or whatever you're doing, or banana leaves if you were being really hardcore. And then you can choose to put more rocks on top of it or not. It just depends on what type of cooking. You want radiating heat, right, on top and bottom. Sometimes you just want it on the bottom. And then more earth, and then whatever you're using to source as a sort of a lid. It could be more banana leaves, or it could be, more, what would you use? A tarp? I don't know. But yeah, if it's pretty well insulated, I find that you do, like, has anybody ever cooked like a roast where you turn the oven on as hot as it'll go and you let it preheat, and then you put the food in and then you turn the oven off completely and you just let the temperature fall? And by the time you're done, the thing is perfectly ready. And that's kind of what's happening in the steam pit, except instead of a roasting effect, you're getting a steaming effect. Do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to take everybody down and look at the smoker while you're getting that ready?
Yeah, I mean, they can go look at it. I'll get one dough made and on this grill, and then I'll show them the next step.
Okay, let's go downstairs. I really wanted like a home scale cold smoker. And so I commissioned some people who are more talented with their hands than I am to make the different components of it. So the guys who work at the farm who make the biochar produce the firebox. This is a well pressure pump. And they've welded just some steel onto the front of it. And they've put these little controls, basically. I would change this maybe in the design if I were doing it again, because not only does this come all the way off and it's easy to lose, but it's just very, very hot and hard to handle. But if you see, they poured, I don't think it's concrete, but it's some kind of like really grainy epoxy or something in the bottom. I don't know what it is. And to fill it, it looks like it, yeah. And they did put a seal around it, but it just melted off. It wasn't the right thing that they put on there. But it's actually okay, because when you're smoking, especially with indirect heat, what you're looking for, again, is draft. You're looking for a pull of air over the smoldering fire that sends the smoke to its target. And what you want, it's just like, I like to think of smoke like I think of water. Like too much water on a plant's roots and it's just sitting in the water, it's gonna rot. Too much smoke just sitting around the food is gonna create bitter flavors. That's what can happen when the Maillard reaction gets a little bit out of hand and you start actually producing acids. I think the other ones are called like melanoidins or something, don't quote me on that, but those are like the flavorful, yummy things. And then if you get past that, you get acids and you get acrid flavors. So that happens if your fire's too hot, if your smoke's too heavy, or if your smoke is stagnant. So I find that not having the seal here is just okay with me, because if I get a little bit of air pull through here, it's fine. Additionally, I have this thing on the front that they welded, so I can close that completely, or I can open it completely, or I can set how much oxygen the fire's getting. So I brought a few different types of wood for you to look at. This is like pretty well cured cherry. And this is a great wood to get the coals established. So I would get my nest going with maybe those cedar shavings, or I would even, use some pine trim that you have from some carpentry project. Get the fire going and then start feeding it medium-sized cherry, larger fuel pieces. Get those coals really going. And then these are relatively, I think this is like 3-month-old apple wood. So it was cut about 3 months ago. It's not completely dry. Even if I wanted the fire to slow down a little bit more, I might dip them in water. I don't ever soak my wood when I'm smoking. It's really not necessary. But sometimes you might want to just bathe the pieces in water really fast just because of the way that affects your fire. It keeps the temperature of the fire down. So then you're slowly just feeding those apple pieces that aren't quite yet cured or maybe fully cured but wet onto that smoldering fire to keep it going, but you don't want a rager. Like you don't want licking flames. You just want a low smolder. And that's the temperature of the fire that's going to keep the smokes volatiles like more delicate. So smoke itself is preservative. So it has a low pH, so it actually prevents pathogens in food. It will completely inhibit the growth of any molds. It's also antioxidant and antimicrobial. As well as having all kinds of different flavors associated with it. The thicker it is, the hotter the fire is, the different flavors are going to come out in your smoked product. The more delicate the smoke, the lighter and more delicate the flavors are going to be. That's why cold smoking is so, so special, especially for things like tofu or cheeses or vegetables, that you can really overpower the inherent flavor of the food if your fire's too hot or your smoke is too thick. Also, this is just like one of the oldest ways of preserving food, and it's so cool to know how to do that kind of thing. So usually I don't even mess with this while I'm smoking. This will be off somewhere and I will have to find it later. This I will want, this is like a rig because I do a lot of teaching about meat and smoking, and so I move this around a lot. But you could go with like stovepipe or something, because this is gonna have to be replaced. You can already see where it's gotten a little melty, because my boyfriend got excited and put it on there when this wasn't ready and this was too hot. But any pipe you have, you just want it to be at a 5 to 10 degree angle from the smoke box, and that's gonna give you that at least enough pull on the smoke. And this is a flexible dryer vent pipe, just in case you were wondering. So you would start the fire without that attached. You wanna get your smoke coming out to the right sort of temperature and your fire to the right sort of temperature before you start. And this right here, this bad boy, it's cedar. The top comes off if you want it to, and then he just drilled through with some dowels. So I can hang, I'm afraid they're gonna fall out if I show it to you, but you can come up and look at it if you want. I can take them out if I want to. I have holes here if I want to move everything down. The lid is leaning up right there next to Alan. The lid fits both on here or on here, so I can downsize the whole thing and get all the food closer to the source of the smoke. But what I usually want is really delicate smoke, so I can pull the food further away from the source of the smoke. So when I was smoking over the last few days, I was temping inside of here, and it was like 80 degrees tops, which is like perfect, like perfect cold smoke temperatures, lower than 80 or 75 degrees. And so he's just got a little vent with a flange on the back that's affixed right here. And it's just, yeah, it's just a hollow box otherwise. It's okay for it to have holes. You want ventilation, you want circulation. I don't even put the lid on it. I've used this 3 times now since he built it, and I don't even put the lid on it when I'm using it, because I want that smoke to just be rushing over the food instead of sitting around it and surrounding it.
How often do you have to reload your fire?
How often? You know, it's actually, with cold smoking, it's not that stressful. Like, you're looking for intermittent smoke and you're looking for really light smoke. So I actually like stocked it up with the apple. I got a low smolder and then I just packed it with apple. And I like, in my head, it's like, I'd rather the fire go out than the fire get too hot, right? So I went to bed and I just let it go out. And then I came back the next morning and started again. And then I think I was probably going to check in on it like every hour once I got the fire where I wanted it. But I went for a bike ride. I went for a 2-hour bike ride and came back and there was still smoke coming out of it. And then, you know, I was gonna go through all that apple wood, but by the time it went out the second time and it had been like 33 hours, I was like, I think we're fine, you know, I'm just gonna stop. But yeah, I mean, it was really impressive to me just how cheaply we accomplished this and how well it's working. I mean, we could have smoked so much more than we did over the last 2 days if we had known how well it was gonna work. Also, we did mozzarella in here. We did salmon, trout, and then we did some portobellas. So we've done a lot of different things. And then what we did the last couple days was 2 sides of pork belly that have been salt cured, and we did a beef sirloin. So I'm excited. Like, there's gonna be a lot of smoked foods happening. Good to have a fire glove like this. You know, you might start the fire and then realize you wanna move that. The other thing I did was, I've got it propped up on a bee box. This is part of a hive, because I want airflow all the way up through it. So it'd be best not to set it there. But we had this on the back of his truck and that in the driveway, and works like a charm.
I wanted to ask you about fuel. You've been talking a lot about woods and the different qualities of them. And I use charcoal, like a natural charcoal.
Yeah.
I see you have a bag like that.
Yeah.
And then I add a piece of cherry.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was sacrilege.
No. So I also use something similar to what you're using. I use a green egg for some of my hot smoking projects, or warm smoking. So that's temperatures between like 80 and like 200, you know. So, and you can accomplish that with your grill. And what I'll do then is I'll use a hardwood charcoal to start, and then I'll add chips or lighter smoking woods to that. But that's really the best way to get the fire going in a unit like that, because you've got to go down into it. And then what's challenging about those is that the food is right on top of, and I don't know if your Weber has a way to feed the fire without moving the food.
Yeah, there's a door.
See, that's great. If you have that, that's way easier. But like the green egg doesn't have that. So you have to kind of get a lot of coals in there, and charcoal is the best way to do that. You can put whatever food on there that you want. And then you put the wood on top of that, and then they actually make like a diffuser. So if you have any grill and you want to turn it into a smoker, you can do this very same thing. Just use something like cast iron to separate the fire from the actual food so that the smoke diffuses around it and then just hits the food so that the flames aren't licking the food, or at least the hot coals aren't searing it. And then if you're worried about moisture and time, you can always wrap it. Like for your lamb leg, I don't know if you will, if it's only 5 pounds. But sometimes if I'm doing like a pork picnic on the green egg, I'll wrap it just, to make sure that it stays nice and moist.
Wrap it in.
Foil, not my fave, but yeah, I'd wrap it in foil. And even here, like if I'm worried about something like getting an off color, even though it's like really light smoke, like I wrapped the mozzarella in cheesecloth and then put baker's twine around it so that any graying that happened was sort of on the cheesecloth, and then I could unwrap it and it was like really nice and white even though it was smoked. So wrapping is not, sacrilege either. You guys want to make some bread? Okay, cool.
While you were down there, smoking up a storm,
You were up here slaving away, weren't you?
slaving over a hot grill, I quickly made a focaccia and threw it on here, and it's not quite done. It's going to take a little more.
Oh, it looks beautiful.
Yeah. It's a little slow. The grill's kind of done.
burned on the bottom?
So far not, I don't think, right?
Oh, it looks good, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm almost thinking I'll flip it to get it to be done on the other side, which I might lose.
The onion. I'm glad you did onion too.
Yeah, I realized we should just throw some things on the grill. What I do is I've got the meal done, right? And then I think I did all this work to make the fire. Now it's perfect.
I know.
So I just take everything in the kitchen and throw it on the grill.
Me too. And fruit is great
Pears,
to do at the end,
yeah.
like pears, oranges.
Yeah, that's why I thought figs,
Yeah, and also I do onions in their skins at the end of a fire. Like if dinner's ready, dinner's over, it's done, I still have coals, I want to sit out there and drink a beer. Especially red onion, I'll get in its skin and just stick it on there and just smoke it. And then you can use it like in salads, pickle it after that. I mean, it's crazy all the things you can do. Just put a little smoke on something, a little flavor, and then use it later.
So are you happy with the egg? Everybody raves.
I love the egg. At first I was kind of like, what's the big deal? It's just a grill. But once I started playing with it and got my diffuser for it that I was telling you about that like diverts the heat, I found that I can really do a lot. I haven't yet baked bread in it, but I've heard that you can really make like amazing, you can kind of work it like one of these wood-fired ovens, where you're sort of got like radiating heat all around. But I haven't done it yet. They're so expensive too. Like I got mine because somebody was like, I don't want this anymore. Like I'm not gonna use it. And I was like, I don't think you know what you have there, buddy. And so I just like took it and was like, maybe I'll just fix it up and sell it, But all I did was like replace the gasket and, just clean it really well, and works great. Yeah.
Has that been cured with salt, or is it just?
Yes. So anytime you're cold smoking, you do want to salt cure meat. This is specific to meat. But this was, it was let's see, 2-to-1 salt to sugar, brown sugar, with a little bit of chili, which you can actually taste. I don't think it was enough chili. I do it by the pound, so really anytime you're salt curing something, you just want 2.5% of the weight of whatever you're curing in salt. That's what's 2.5 or more, but you don't really want more than 3.5 because then you're going to create overly salty eating. So you put that on, and then that's the level of salt that's going to draw water out of the cells and cure it. So I would put it in that amount of salt for like a day and a half per pound. So this was a 4-pound belly originally, and part of a belly, and I put it in that salt sugar mix for maybe 7 days. and then rinsed it off and got it really nice and dry. Because anytime you're smoking food, when it's drier, the smoke will adhere better. The surface of it is drier, the smoke will adhere better. So I put a box fan over it and just let it run while I was getting the smoker ready, and then I hung it up. I could also put like a, one of those like metal drying racks on top of those dowels and put something on. That's how I did the fish, because I was afraid it would lose. One of them didn't have skin. I was afraid it would just melt. And it didn't. It was fine.
There'll be more bread coming, but the rest has to cook a little longer.
But yeah, that's basically
Okay,
it.
so let me explain what I did here. I make a very wet dough. I kind of push it. I've been a professional baker, and I learned that the secret to the pros for high quality bread and lower cost is absorption. The more water they put in there, the better the quality. The more mess too, which is what's hard for home bakers and small scale bakers. But you can get really good, someplace like 70% water or something like that. And so this is a very wet dough, which I'll barely manage to get on here, and I'll quickly, you don't want to spend a lot of time or it'll just glue itself to the board. So I'll quickly just spread that stuff on it and go. I forgot to bring salt, so I used a little bit of Maillard sage salt. And with this, I had the little grill thing, roasting pan there on, getting hot, and I had this lid getting hot. And actually that lid's the wrong way now. I don't want any escape of the heat, so I should be running it like this, so that it's completely flat down. If you're using that wetted dough, and we have a couple of videos about how to make bread, so you can watch and see how to do this. It's not very much work at all. You get your hands oiled well so the dough doesn't stick to your hands. Get yourself a piece and move fast, and don't look back. And you want to really let your dough relax as long as possible. The minute I knew I was doing this morning, I realized, oh yeah, I want to make a dough. First thing I did was make a sponge. Sponge is all the water, half the flour, and the yeast. Any other fermentables can go in there, but nothing that won't ferment. And you let that rise until it hits its peak. And that right before it starts to fall, you make the dough. Why I did that is you get better nutrition. This is actually flour that's got a fair amount of what's left in it. It's made by Carolina Ground, and she's really like tweaking the flours to get the bran out, but keep the nutrition in, so you have kind of like white flour, but it's still, you want to be sure this thing is moving, so that'll stay on there. And then re-spread it every time you move it, because it shrinks back in every time.
Just a type of cornmeal.
This is actually semolina. I like it more than cornmeal. Cornmeal tends to burn and smoke more, so I'm pretty much sold on semolina at this point. But both will work. I'd use just coarse rye flour if I had nothing else. There's not a rule. You don't have to have a rule.
Or salt. You could use salt.
Except for it might be pretty salty to have enough salt to get it to slide off. Basically, what you're putting on there is working like ball bearings, so that the dough will slide off.
Did you want the onion for that, or was that
No, that was just for the fun of it. Okay. Just to show them, put stuff on the grill. Don't waste all those coals.
Yeah, I had some peaches I was going to bring, and I forgot.
This recipe is from the Italian baker. It's Pizza Romano, I think. And it's designed to copy bakery in the main square in Rome, Plaza, I guess. And basically, it's designed to slide the peel into the back of the oven, catch the dough on the back of the oven, and stretch it a meter across the oven. And then rapidly bake it. The minute it's baked, pull it out, and that's it. And it's got nothing but olive oil, salt, and I think rosemary on it. That's it.
And you brought a clay pot. Did you want to, or is that cast iron?
That's cast iron. That's the Dutch oven.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's. And by the way, I find the best place to buy those are like country stores. Country stores. I mean, they're not cheap anyways, but it's if you go to like a flea market and think you're getting a deal, you'll spend more than you will at a country store.
That's true.
Like that was probably $40 or something, which is it'd be like 75 or 90 at a flea market. Well, we can just slide this thing off. I think the bread should be done. The figs, of course, can be done at any point. We just cook them as much as we want to.
Ooh, that looks good. Look at that.
And folks, I didn't mention, by the way, I did, of course, push the coals back and scrape all the ash off that oven. And I put some bricks in front of the coals because it would burn otherwise. It'd be so much heat.
It's hot.
Oh, I think that corn is probably ready too, don't you?
Yeah.
All right. So that oven was hot enough that I already have to check that focaccia.
You guys can decide if you want to eat that part of it.
How hot was it?
It was only like 500 and something actually. I didn't really have a chance to burn it as long as I wanted to. If we were doing a long bake, like we had the AmeriCorps volunteers out here, and we were baking pizza for like 20 people, and I started firing it at 10,
Okay.
and fed it till 5. You know, so it got 7 solid hours.
Ooh, I think these got a little overdone.
Okay. Well, that sometimes makes for interesting flavors. Let's see. I mean, the part that's good could be very interesting.
I mean, you're just standing here trying to teach class. What would you do if it was just you looking over that? Would you turn them or move them or?
Right now, what would I do?
Earlier on.
Earlier on? Well, I think I just should have taken them off sooner.
Well, and also I would have tried to gather more
But
ash.
yeah, and also like, they might be okay. Like they might have enough insulation from the leaves that they're fine. It's just that you never know until you unveil it, you know?
Yeah, actually, it looks pretty good to me.
Looks all right. The other thing I like to do with meat is you can wrap it in cheesecloth. Well, you'd want to salt it really well. Get a nice salt crust on the outside of it, wrap it in cheesecloth, and put it on the ashes. And it'll catch on fire. And that cheesecloth and that salt will go together, and the meat will cook, and it'll tenderize. And then you'll just peel the cheesecloth and the salt off, much like I'm peeling off this leaf right here. And man, talk about delicious fire-cooked food. That's one of my favorite. And it's kind of a showstopper too, like if you're having company.
Todd, I wanted to ask you about the dough again. Maybe I missed it, but you said it was some kind of special flour that you get.
Yeah, Carolina ground. You know about Carolina ground?
No.
They sell it at the French Broad Food Co-op and probably other places, but I buy there.
And yeast. You put yeast in it?
Yes, it is yeasted. This is a yeasted dough. We do a lot of sourdoughs, but Italian breads, had I had more presence of mind, I might have done a biga, which is a starter, basically a little bit of flour and yeast the night before, just to get more, flavor.
Oh, so a biga's not the same as a sponge?
No, it's not. No.
I thought it was just the Italian word for a
A
sponge.
biga is the Italian word for starter. Like a goulash,
Cool.
every country's got a different name.
Yeah. So keep in mind that the seeds are in here, so they'll be crunchy, but don't be alarmed. It's not going to hurt you. And the skin is still on, but you can eat that too. A lot of people don't realize that. Nice.
Cool.
Beautiful. That looks delicious, Pat.
Open it in. It should be. With some luck.
Now we eat.
Oh, and so something else to know, folks. Even though that oven's not as hot as I want, I've got a whole bunch of coals in the back. I can pull those bricks out, pull the coals back over, totally resaturate it. The longer I let those hot coals sit on there, the hotter that floor is going to get. I could probably get it up to 600, 700.
I should have dug that steam pit after all, because when you were done with that oven, I could just
Yep,
put all your coals in it.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yep, it's true.
But again, going home sounds like a good idea too.
Yeah, it's very hard to cover enough territory and know when to stop when you're teaching these classes.
Yeah, so we will wrap it up really fast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yay, thank you.